Okay.
Okay. So welcome. And this is actually really very exciting because we're going to start doing Parsha, doing the Torah portion. And because last week I I was with my community studying Torah as a community. I wasn't able to be with you, but last week most of you probably know that the Jewish people started studying from the beginning, literally, the Parsha of Bereshit. And so in order to catch up, what I want to do today is do a little bit of intro to the concept of a Torah portion, and then do Bereshit and Noach together, which is this week's Torah portion. Um, so it'll be a little more condensed than moving forward, because moving forward, I'll have a whole session to be able um, to do each parsha, but we need some background and um, and then we need to squeeze two in. So let's get going, okay? So uh, the first thing I want to tell you is that there are 54 Torah portions, what we say in Hebrew, parshiot. A parsha is the Hebrew word for a Torah portion, okay? And the plural is parshiot. There are 54 Torah portions, 54 parshiot in a yearly Torah reading cycle. And all Jewish communities all around the world study the same parsha in the same week almost all year, except that there's a few exceptions to account for times when the holiday schedule in Israel is somewhat different than the holiday schedule outside of Israel. What does that mean? Without getting too technical about our calendar, there are certain holidays, Passover and Sukkot in particular, that are one day in Israel and 2 days in outside of Israel. And so sometimes we get a little off sync, but we always catch up. So, and then there's some weeks, what we call a double parsha, where there's two Torah portions that are read in the same week, and certain parshiot are almost always doubled. So, depending on that's one of the ways that we catch up, is that let's say if Israel is ahead, then outside of Israel, they might read two portions in the same week to catch up to where Israel is. You don't have to know that technically speaking, but just a little background. Okay. Like the names of the five books of Moses, the Torah portions, the Parshiot, are all named for the first significant word that appears in the Parsha. Each Torah portion is somewhere between 2 chapters and 6 chapters that are read and studied the entire week. So from Sunday until Shabbat. Um, so sometimes uh, Jewish people will say, instead of a date, they will say like the week of Parshat Noach. That would be this week because on Shabbat we're going to read Parshat Noach. Okay. The custom of dividing the Torah readings into dividing the five books of Moses into these 54 sections goes back to the time of the Babylonian exile. So we're talking about like 2,600 years ago or so, after the destruction of the first temple. The origin of this was the first public Torah reading that we find in the book of Nehemiah. If you want, how do you say that? Nehemiah? I don't know. In chapter 8, so Ezra the scribe, Ezra HaSofer, he writes about he wants to find a way to make sure that the Israelites will not continue to stray. And so his method for that is to have a weekly system to read the Torah portion out loud. Okay. And so Jews have basically been reading and studying the Parsha every week for approximately 2,500 years. And now you're going to be on that cycle with us. Each of the five books of Moses has between 10 and 12 Torah portions. So Bereshit, the book of Genesis, has 12. Shemot, the book of Exodus, has 11. Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, has 10. Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, has 10. And Devarim, Deuteronomy, has 11. Christians tend to memorize chapter and verse. Okay. So they will be able to say, you know, um, what book, what chapter, what verse, where a Jew will generally know, not necessarily chapter and verse about a particular passage, but where, what parsha it's in. Okay, that's how we talk. Um, so now, in terms of commentaries, there are literally thousands of commentaries on the weekly Torah portion, and each one has a slightly different emphasis. So I had to figure out how to move ahead with you. And this is what I decided. I made a choice to focus on three areas, and we'll see how that goes today and if it works. So the first thing I want to do is a summary of what the Parsha contains. I'm not going to go into detail. I'm assuming that most of you have a pretty good level of biblical literacy. It's more just a reminder of what are the like bullet points of what happened in each Parsha. Then I started looking for what does this Parsha have to do with the non-Israelites? What are who are the non-Israelite personalities in that appear in the Parsha? Now, I have to say, before we get to even Avraham, which doesn't happen until next week, I was just counting the Parshiot. Avraham shows up in the third Parsha of the Torah. Until we get to that, really, basically, everybody is a non-Israelite. So it was a little harder this time, but I did find ways to talk about the nations and so forth. And then the last thing is I have my eye open for commentary related to women in the Parsha. Okay, so that is not a typical way of approaching Parsha study, but I think for us, I wanted to focus on the things that I thought would be most interesting and most relevant for you. And for me, a more interesting way of approaching it than just a standard Parsha commentary that I would normally read. I want to teach you this idea before we go into Bereshit, before we go into the first parsha, called Pardes. It's a theory of biblical exegesis. And Pardes, literally in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, Pardes is an orchard. So when you are at, if any of you have ever been to Israel and you have been at the airport, the main airport, the Ben Gurion airport, where all of the commercial flights come in and out, one of the parking lots is called Pardes. Okay, so that literally means an orchard. But in this context, it's an acronym formed from the initials of four different approaches to studying Torah. And I'm going to go through them with you. Okay. One, so we have basically, if you think of it in English, PRDS. So we're leaving out the vowels, okay? The P stands for Pshat. Pshat in Hebrew is the literal, plain meaning of the text. Okay, so when you read a text and it says seven of King David's soldiers were in the field, I'm making up a verse. Okay, that means there were seven of King David's soldiers in the field. No, nothing surprising. But that is, as far as Jewish Torah study is concerned, that is only the beginning of understanding how to pull out of this text all of the richness that God put in it. So the second level, that was the peep shot. The second level, the R, is remez. And of course, I'm using English letters, but remez means a hint. Okay. So in modern Hebrew, remazim are hints, but they are hints to an allegorical meaning beyond the literal sense. So if we take this example of this verse that I made up about there being seven soldiers from King David's army in the field, it might be that the seven is a hint to the 7 days of the week, something like that. Okay. So it doesn't contradict the fact that there literally were seven men in the field, but it's saying more than that. The D in drash comes from the Hebrew darash, which means to inquire or to seek. So if you are in modern Hebrew, if you're looking for employees, for example, this is the word that you would use, employees, seeking employees. But here it's a reference to the midrashic meaning. Okay. So this is like a rabbinic commentary. And then the S stands for sod, which in Hebrew, modern Hebrew means a secret. But here we're talking about the esoteric or the mystical meaning that comes from the inner or hidden Torah. So we probably have spoken about this before, but in this context, it's worthwhile to review that the Torah that we have now, the entirety of the Torah that's available to us in this stage of history, is not the entirety of the Torah. There's some of it that we don't have. And there's two ways of understanding that. One is that when Moses went up to Mount Sinai, and got the Torah, and he came down and he saw everybody frolicking with the golden calf, and he smashed the tablets, and then he went back up for 40 days and brought back another set of tablets. There are differences between those two transmissions. So the tradition is that the first transmission was complete, but that God saw that the people were not ready for the complete transmission. And so what he came down with the second time was the information that people would need to keep the Torah until the time of Mashiach, when the rest of it would be revealed. There's a similar idea that after the exile from the land of Israel, after the destruction of the second temple in the year 70, the rabbis in the next 100 years recorded the parts of the Torah that were necessary to keeping the laws and to understanding God's role in the world, but parts of the Torah that were more esoteric, the underlying working of creation, they were mostly lost. They were not recorded. So we don't even know all the hidden meanings and secrets of God's creation. Here's an example. A maple leaf has a certain form that is recognizable to most people. But we don't know why did God create a maple leaf to look like that? We don't know. But the way that we understand it, there are explanations for that, and they will be revealed by the Messiah, by Mashiach, when we um, are privileged to be in his company and when he teaches us the pieces that are missing. Okay. There's some of it we do have, and it exists in the realm of Hasidus. It exists in the realm of Kabbalah, but much of it is not accessible to us. Having said that, there's still plenty of Torah to study and to keep you busy for a very long time. Each type of these interpretations extends the meaning of the text. But as a general rule, the extended meaning never contradicts the basic literal meaning of the text. Okay, so they all sort of live together. So I'll tell you, when I first started studying Torah, I remember I was studying the story of King David and Abigail, who I'm assuming you know as Abigail, and how they met, and how um, that whole story that I'm not going to repeat right now, but I remember being blown away because my teacher would say, okay, we would study the text, and then she would say, but it also means this, and it also means this, and it also, all of those layers are um, embedded in the text, but you can't get to them without Hebrew and without rabbinic commentary. If you just were to read the Torah just on the face of it, including, especially if you're reading it in a language other than Hebrew, all of this richness is just not accessible. So that's my job, is to try to share with you some of that deeper stuff, because that's, as I always say, that's where the juice is. Okay, so let's look at Bereshit. So the Torah portion Bereshit, it encompasses the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 1, till chapter 6, verse 8. And here's the summary. None of this is going to be surprising to you. In the Parsha, God creates the heavens, the world, Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, creates Shabbat. A serpent convinces Chava, Eve, who then invites Adam to eat a fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. By the way, I might have mentioned this to you last year, but I'll say it again in this context. This fruit, I don't know how Christians made it into an apple. There's no textual explanation for it being an apple. It's not an apple. There are different rabbinic opinions about what it is. Some people say it was grapes. Some people say it was figs. Some people would say it was an etrog, which I think in English is a citron. It's a bumpy yellow fruit that we use on Sukkot. But in any case, this whole concept of this being an apple, which is so culturally embedded in most people's minds, it has zero textual support. Okay. So basically, there's this tree of the knowledge of good and evil that God says, eat whatever you want, just stay away from this tree, whatever this tree was. Um, and he forbids it to them. So they eat from it anyway. And God curses the ground and he expels Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, from the Garden of Eden. One of their sons, who you know as Cain, or Cain, he becomes the first murderer. He kills his brother Hevel, you probably call Abel, out of jealousy. And after that, Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve have other children whose descendants populate the earth. And each generation, each successive generation becomes more and more degenerate until God says, the most compassionate thing I can do here is destroy humanity. I'm going to keep one family alive and start all over again. And that family is, of course, Noach. Okay, couple of interesting Hebrew facts from Bereshit. The word Bereshit in Hebrew has 6 letters: Bet, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yud, Taf. And those symbolize the 6 days of creation. The 6 letters symbolize the 6 days. That's very cool. I think that's very cool. Also, the verse of Bereshit, chapter 1, verse 1, has 7 words, which symbolizes the 7 days of the week. So the 6 days of creation plus Shabbat. And also, the letter Aleph is used 6 times in that verse, Bereshit, Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 1, that symbolizes the 6,000 years that the world will exist before transitioning into a new reality. So in modern Hebrew, the word Aleph, which sounds like Aleph, and it starts with an Aleph, in Hebrew, it means 1,000. I thought those were just some interesting tidbits. Okay. Let's talk about what does Bereshit have to do with the nations. Okay, so Rashi, who was the greatest biblical commentator that we have, begins his commentary on the Torah by asking, why does the Torah open with the creation of the world? If the Torah is supposed to be the story of the relationship between God and the Jewish people, why does it go all the way back to creation? And I want to read you this commentary. It's a few paragraphs, but it's so critically important and also incredibly relevant to what's happening in the news right now. So I'm going to I'm going to read it for you verbatim in English. Okay, so Rashi says it was not necessary to begin the Torah except from this month is for you, which we find in Shemot, in the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verse 2, which is the first commandment that the Israelites were commanded. For the main purpose of the Torah is the commandments, and although several commandments are found in Genesis, circumcision and the prohibition of eating the um, thigh, the sinew from the thigh, they could have been taught later on. For what reason did God begin the Torah with in the beginning? Because, says Rashi, of the verse that we find in the book of Psalms, the book of Tehillim, chapter 111, verse 6, the strength of his works he related to his people to give them the inheritance of nations. Okay, so this is the main part I want you to focus on. For if the nations of the world should say to Israel, quote, you are robbers, for you conquered by force the lands of the 7 nations of Canaan, they, that is the Jewish people, Israel, will reply, quote, the entire earth belongs to the Holy One, blessed be he. He created this, which we learned this from the story of creation, and he gave it to whomever he deemed proper when he wished. He gave it to them, and when he wished, he took it away from them, and he gave it to us. Okay, so beginning with the story of creation is, I don't know that anybody who doesn't think that the Jewish people have a right to live in the land where God started everything. And I don't know that this would convince them, but it does strengthen the um, the certainty of people who believe in the Bible that God created the world and that God gave this land to the nation of Israel. Okay. So beginning with the story of creation is also a fundamental teaching of Emunah, a fundamental teaching of faith, that the world has a creator. It didn't just start in the middle of the story where everybody was here and everything was already set up, and there were animals and there were plants and there were fish and all that. The fact that the world has a creator is not obvious to most of humanity, but that is the very basic teaching of why the story of creation is included at the very beginning of the Bible. Also, the stories of creation are relevant for all people because in this Parsha, we learn, number one, that humans are the pinnacle of creation. Everything was created first before God brought humanity into the world. So it was like the whole party was all set up before the guest of honor appeared. Okay. Also, that humans were expelled from the Garden of Eden because of sin. That concept of not following, there being consequences to not following God's uh, rules is a concept that is relevant for all of humanity. That all the people in the generation of the flood, except for Noah and his family, were destroyed because of sin. That the children of Noah also sinned, and they were dispersed all over the world. And this idea that when a nation sins, it loses its place and another nation takes over its land. These are like biblical truths that are relevant until today. And this last one makes me think of, not, I don't want to get too political, but there are people in Israel who believe that the citizens of Gaza have so abused the privilege of holding on to that strip of land that God will hopefully take it away from them and restore it back to the original nation that he gave that land to, because they just abused it and sinned and did terrible things with it. Okay. One way of dividing the Torah, and it's not an equal division into three parts, but dividing the five books of Moses is three consecutive sections: the Torah of creation, the Torah of man in general, humanity in general, and the Torah of Israel. Okay, so everything in the natural world, everything that science has learned already or will ever learn about the world, as well as secrets that they will never discover, is part of the Torah of creation. How things came to be as they are, and whatever we can figure out about the natural world. The Torah of man, the Torah of humanity, is summarized in one verse, which also hints to the seven universal Noahide laws. If you have a Tanakh at your side or on your phone or whatever, if you can look up, I'm going to go through it with you, but just you can look at it yourself. Look at Bereshit, Genesis chapter 2, verse 16. This is the verse where Hashem commanded man, saying, "Of every tree of the garden you may surely eat." That's the whole verse. Now, this is what the rabbis say, and it is hard to do it in English, but I'm going to try to do it. So the word vayitzav means commanded, and that is a remez, that is a hint to the obligation to establish courts to deal with civil law. That's one of the seven Noahide laws. Now, there's two Hebrew words for God in this verse. One is Adonai, which I say Hashem, and the other is Elohim, which I say Elohim, but they both mean God. The first use of the word Adonai is a remez, it's a hint to the prohibition of cursing God's name. And the second use of the word, so I don't know what your translation says. Mine says Hashem, God, which is Adonai Elohim. in Hebrew, but yours may have a different translation. But the second use of the name of God, Elohim, is a prohibition against idolatry. So that is the third of the seven Noahide laws. Al Ha'adam, which means man. Okay, so we have God commanding man, Adam. Okay, that's the prohibition of murder because you can only murder something that's alive. When God is commanding humanity, the verb that's used is lemor, which means saying. This one, it was a little not so clear to me, but that, according to the rabbis, is the prohibition of illicit sexual relations. Maybe because saying it's transactional, it's interactive, it requires a speaker and a listener, just like sexual relations require two people. I'm not sure. Um, the expression in Hebrew, mikol eitz hagan, means of every tree in the garden. That is a reference to the prohibition of theft. And the last of the seven is achol tochal, which in English means surely eat, and that is the prohibition of eating the limb torn from a live animal. Okay, so this would be an example of how Torah study works when you have access to the Hebrew and you have access to the rabbinic commentary. You would read that verse in English. Hashem God commanded man, saying, "Of every tree of the garden you may surely eat," as a fairly simple on the level of pshat. That's the first level that we of the four that we spoke about, on a fairly simple level of okay, so God's telling them you can do this, and these are the things that you can do. But when you go deeper, you see that it means so much more. There's so much more packed into it. There is an interesting teaching that at this time of history, there are these seven Noahide laws, but after Mashiach comes, these laws will be expanded to and will be obligatory on the part of humanity that is not Jewish. And there will be as many as 30 that specifically apply to the nations. Those 30 are not applicable right now. Right now, people from the nations are obligated in these seven laws. There are other opinions about where these seven laws, what we call in Hebrew, Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the seven Noahide laws, where they come from. One thing we do know is that they are not written explicitly in the Torah. This question comes up all the time when I'm talking to people who are new to Torah study, who are not Jewish, and they say, "Show me where these laws are." It's a reasonable question, but they are not explicitly written in the Torah. They're hinted to. So there's another example of one of these four exegetical, it's not a word I use all the time. I think that's how you say it. But this principle of learning Torah, that what's on the face of it is not the whole story. I pounded that point to death, but I think that you get the idea. Okay, so we have the Torah of creation, which tells the story of how everything came to be in the physical world. We have the Torah of man, of humanity in general, that speaks about what God wants from most of the world. And then beginning in the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot, chapter 12, verse 2, which I told you about, that is where it becomes very specifically related to the Jewish people, because that's where the first commandment that God gives to the Jewish people, which is how you count the months and keep a calendar, that is until the end of the five books of Moses. That is most of the Torah, and that part relates most specifically to the Jewish people. However, you'll see as we go through the year and as we go through the Parshiot, that I'm going to bring you the more details about the stories of the non-Israelites, I don't know what to let's call them non-Israelites for now, the people that play a role in the story of the Torah that aren't part of the family. Okay. Now, the original and we're going to start with Bereshit, because the original mission of the world wasn't originally a Jewish mission. There were no Jewish people back in the beginning. There was just Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. And their original mission was that they should take care of the world, they should multiply, they should populate it, and they should teach all of humanity about God. Now they failed. And that mission was passed on to Noah, who also failed. And the world became increasingly immoral. And then after the generation of the Tower of Babel, which God took control over the world, away from these people, and gave it to one family. And that one family is the descendants of Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah, that is the Jews. Okay. So it was not, however you understand God's intention, that it wasn't God's intention. And we spoke about this, I think, 2 weeks ago about the concept of being the chosen people. What are we chosen for? We are chosen for this mission to teach the world about God. And it was originally supposed to be a more universal mission, but for 20 generations, from Adam to Noach, and from Noach to Abraham, 20 generations failed. And so God said, okay, I'm gonna give this mission to somebody that I think can really carry it on. And so our rabbis teach that since then, non-Jews have the power to improve or destroy themselves, but the task of completing the rectification for the entire world, according to our rabbis, is now exclusively in the hands of the Jewish people. That may be it's a little uncomfortable for me to say that, and it may be a little uncomfortable for you to hear, but that is why I think there is so much hatred and anti-Semitism, because even if it's not a conscious awareness, the nations of the world understand that the land of Israel is somehow central to the complete rectification of the world. It's the control center of the world. And the nation that dwells in Israel, in some sense, spiritually speaking, controls the destiny of the world. That I don't want to misspeak, and I don't want you to mishear. I am not saying Jews run the world. I'm saying that one of the tools that God put in place in order to rectify creation and make it good for everybody. This is not a mission that is only for the Jewish people, is to put the Jewish people in the land of Israel, because those are two spiritually powerful tools that God has for the rectification of the world. And it's also, by the way, why there's a demand to make Jerusalem an international city by the nation of the world. It's a way of, even if they're not conscious of it, this is what I'm hypothesizing, that it is a way of making making Jerusalem less powerful, and sharing the authority that God put in the hands of this land and this people. Okay. But the story of Bereshit and Rashi's promise that God gave the land of Israel to whomever he decided is that the biblical basis for Jewish ownership of the land of Israel. And I already told you that in 20 generations, so from Adam to Noah, from Adam to Noah is 10 generations, from Noach to Abraham is another 10. The nations were in control of this land, and they nearly destroyed the world. So the Jewish people living in the land of Israel and keeping God's laws helps the rest of creation flourish. Okay, let's move on to Noah, so I don't want to run out of time. Okay. So here's the summary. So the Parsha of Noach begins in the book of Genesis, in the book of Bereshit, chapter 6, verse 9, till chapter 11, verse 32. And basically, here's what happens. God instructs Noah, who he determines is the only righteous man in a world consumed by violence and corruption, to build a large wooden ark, what we call in Hebrew a teva, to coat it inside and outside with pitch. This may sound familiar to you. We'll talk about that in a minute. And God is going to flood the world and wipe out all life from the face of the earth, but the ark will float on the water, and it's going to shelter Noah and his family, and the two members of each animal species. And you may or may not know this, I'm not sure if you know this, that every species, every kind of animal that was eligible to be used for a sacrifice in the future, Noah was instructed to bring 7 pairs. So 1 pair of animals for most kind of animals, and 7 pairs of the species that would be able to be used for sacrifices in the future. So rain falls for 40 days and 40 nights. The waters churn for another 150 days before they calm down and they begin to recede. The ark settles where? Not in Israel, on Mount Ararat, which is in modern Turkey. And Noah dispatches a raven and then a series of doves because he wants to see if the water has receded enough. The ground dries completely. It takes an entire year, 365 days after the onset of the flood. And God says, okay, Noah, it's time to leave and repopulate the earth. So, um, so Noah and his wife, their 3 sons and their wives, so 8 human beings, leave the ark. Noah builds an altar and he offers sacrifices to God. So he has these extra animals to sacrifice. And God swears never to destroy all of humanity again. And he sets a rainbow as the testimony of this new agreement, that a new covenant that he has with man, that he's never going to destroy the entire world again, no matter how bad it gets. God commands Noah about the sacredness of life. So murder is now a capital offense. And now the commandment or the permission is given to eat meat. That was never part for the first 20 generations of humanity. Everybody was vegan. It was only when Noah left the ark that permission was given to eat the meat of animals, but not the flesh or blood that's taken from a living animal. And that is, of course, one of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, one of the 7 laws. Okay, so Noah plants a vineyard. He becomes drunk on its produce. Okay, so he planted wine. 2 of his sons, Shem and Japhet, I don't know what you call him, Japheth, I don't know what you call him, are blessed for covering up their father's, generally it's understood as nakedness, but he was in an indiscreet situation. And the third son, who we call Ham, is punished for taking advantage of Noah in his drunken state. The descendants of, we'll talk about that a little bit more also. The descendants of Noah remain a single people with a single language and culture for 10 generations. Then they defy God and they build this Tower of Babel to symbolize, what are they symbolizing? Their own invincibility. They want to fight with God. And so what does God do? He confuses their languages so that they can't understand each other. That causes them to abandon the project and disperse across the face of the earth. And this is where humanity splits into the 70 biblical nations. Okay. And the Parsha concludes with a chronology of the generations from Noah to Abraham, and a little bit about Abraham's journey from his birthplace on his way to Canaan. Now, this is so much to absorb. I hope you guys are with me. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the personality of Noah, because he's really, some people say he was a great tzaddik and a great righteous person, and that God favored him, and other people say that he basically failed at his mission. So Noach had the ability to spread the Torah and to teach it to the whole world. And by the Torah here, we didn't yet have physically the Torah, because that doesn't come until the time of Moshe, but there were godly teachings. He had the ability to teach the world about God, which is, as I said, this universal job that was originally given to Adam and Chava, to Adam and Eve. But the people of the generation had deteriorated so much, and their sins were so many and so severe, that they did not want to hear about righteous things. Also, for the 120 years that Noah worked on building the ark, he failed to pray for his generation to repent. He did not save a single other person outside of his family. So imagine, we can't even imagine what 120 years is, but he's building this thing 120 years. People must have come to him and said, "Hey, Noah, what are you doing?" He's, "Oh, I'm going to build an ark because God is going to bring a flood. And if you don't change your ways, you're going to drown and die in the flood." And whether his generation just like they just couldn't hear it, or he wasn't an effective communicator, or whatever, he built the ark and he gathered the animals and he survived the flood, but he did not save anybody else outside of his family. There is a mystical teaching that comes from the Zohar that the generation of the flood, those people were ultimately reincarnated as a generation who received the Torah on Mount Sinai through the hand of Moses. So the Israelite slaves, well, the people who became Israelite slaves were the same people who sinned in the time of Noah and the Tower of Babel, and they were purified, spiritually speaking, by their suffering in Egypt in preparation for receiving the Torah. There's some other parallels between Noah and Moshe. One is that Noah was saved in a teva, in an ark from the floodwaters, and Moses was saved from the waters of the Nile River, also in an ark. Also, the rabbis say that both Moses and Noah were born already circumcised. So the teaching, to continue a little further, is that Moshe was a reincarnation of Noah, and he repaired the mistakes that Noah made, one of them being not praying for his generation. Okay. So just to kind of put this together, God created this perfect world for Adam and Chava, for Adam and Eve. All they had to do was refrain from eating from this one particular tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the world would have reached its perfection. That plan failed when they ate from the forbidden fruit, the non-apple. And 10 generations pass until Noach, during which time humanity plunged deeper and deeper into sin, and God decides to start over. It's like a big reset button, with the hope that Noach would do what Adam and Chava were unable to do, to perfect the world that he wanted to create. The entire year of the flood, the 365 days, the atmosphere, say the rabbis, in the ark was similar to that of the world to come. Noah was like Adam in the Garden of Eden before the sin. So the initial plan was that Noah would exit the ark, exit the Teva directly into the land of Israel and inaugurate the Messianic era. But that plan failed also when, um, so the son, the bad son, whose name is Ham, Noah's son, Ham and his wife. So there was a rule on the ark that even though there were four couples, that they were not to be intimate together, because there's chaos and destruction going on outside, and the it would be inappropriate and distasteful for them to have intimate relations. But Ham and his wife didn't follow that rule, and they were intimate on the ark. And while they were on the ark, his wife became pregnant with a child that they later named Canaan. It was Canaan, the child who was conceived while on the ark, while intimate relations were forbidden, who's the one who told Ham about his grandfather's drunken condition after they all got out of the ark. Okay. And I've already mentioned to you that the ark landed on Mount Ararat in Turkey rather than the land of Israel. And even after, Noach's son Ham did worse things. Okay. So this is a little graphic, but we're all adults, so I'm going to tell you anyway. So one opinion is that Ham castrated his father. And his rationale was Adam had two sons, Cain and Abel. And Cain killed Hevel because he didn't want to share the world with his brother. He wanted to be the only inheritor. Ham, according to this opinion, is thinking, well, my father has three sons and he wants to have more children. So as it is now, the best I'm going to get is 1/3 of everything. But if my father has more sons, I'm gonna get even less than that. So I'm gonna castrate him to make sure that he can't have any more sons. That was his thinking. There's an even more disgusting opinion that Ham sodomized his drunken father, that in doing so, he wanted to symbolically degrade his father and bring him down like to the level of an animal. So it's sodomy is an act that reduces the nobility of humanity to the level of animal desire. And it was an act that captured the essence of Ham's degenerate personality and his personal philosophy. So Noach is like the symbol of the nobility of humanity, and Ham is the symbol of the degeneracy of humanity. So last year we talked about this concept that everything in the world that has a potential for holiness has an equal and opposite potential for unholiness. Okay, so this is an example of that. And I want to end with a bit about the character that is called Naamah, who is the wife of Noach. Okay. So in Bereshit chapter 4, verse 22, we see the mention of Naamah. So um, there's a grandson of Noach whose name is Tuval Cain, and he was a warrior, not a good guy, and he had a sister named Naamah. This is mentioned in Bereshit in Genesis chapter 4, verse 22. Now, um, if if all of the descendants of Cain perished in the flood, why are we taught about these names? Okay, so the only reason that scripture has to mention her name is to connect her with Rashi. Okay, I mean to connect her with Noah. So based on this, even though it doesn't say it explicitly, Rashi connects Naamah to be the name of the wife of Noach. And she is like something like Chava, like Eve, the mother of all life, because there's nobody else there except Noach and Naamah and their three children. So the only human beings that are alive are the human beings that she gave birth to and their wives. Okay, but who is she and why did she deserve to be saved from the curse of the flood? So in the Torah, women are responsible for their own actions. So just having a righteous husband is not enough to save them. So Chava, Eve, was held responsible for eating from the tree. Also, the wife of Lot died even though Lot was saved. Okay. So the rabbis teach that Naamah had to have what was her own merit in order to be saved from the flood. She wasn't just saved just because she was the wife of Noach. So her name, which in Hebrew means pleasant or pleasant one, is a hint to why she deserved to be saved. So the Midrash explains that Noach's wife was a righteous woman who deserved to be saved in her own right. Um, she is called the pleasant one because her deeds were pleasing. So she's she was known for being a righteous woman in those generations. Now, interestingly enough, everybody in that generation, almost everybody in that generation, was so filled with sin and evil and bad behavior that they were killed, but she was saved. Okay, and we know that she had to have emunah, faith, and she had to have courage, and she had to have endurance to partner with Noach in surviving the flood. Because remember, for 120 years, he was building this ark. She stayed with him all that time, went on to went onto the ark with him, helped him in the task of taking care of all of the animals, and emerged whole from the ark. Okay. So the rest of the descendants of Cain, they perished in the flood. Cain, who killed his brother Hevel, his only continuation, his only descendant is through Naamah. So from Naamah, we learn the power of repentance, the power of tshuva, because it was only so Cain, after he killed his brother, he really did some serious soul searching and did some repentance. And through that, he merited to have Naamah, who was the mother of the entire future world. And they descend from her, and thus they descend from Cain. And even though her brother was evil, her brother, who we call Tuval Cain, he produced weapons for murder. She didn't learn from him. She remained Naamah. She remained a woman whose deeds were pleasant. So, having the backbone to remain righteous, she's living in a wicked generation. She is the daughter of somebody who killed his brother. She is the sister of somebody who created weapons for murder. She is just immersed in dark deeds, but she remains righteous among the wicked. And that is a virtue that later proved vital to become part of the only righteous family in the generation. There's an opinion that Noach was even greater than Abraham, because his generation was even more wicked, and it's a challenge to withstand kind of that peer pressure of the influence of everybody around him. And one might say that it's possible that the greatness of Noach was in the merit of his wife, because she had learned to withstand the evil influence of her brother. And perhaps it was Naamah that taught her husband how to remain strong and to resist the influence of the evilness of his environment. Okay, that um, all of that is what I prepared to share with you. And um, um, now I want to see. I find the Zoom thing so challenging. Okay. So now I just want to ask, do any of you have any questions? Is there anything that you would like to ask before we finish up?
So I have a question.
Yes.
Hopefully my headphones don't die. So I watched a teaching on the seven laws of Noah from a Rabbi Ephraim. I can't say his last name, like
I know who
Pavlov.
you mean. I know who
You
you
know who
mean.
I'm talking about?
I
Okay,
listened
so
to it myself this week.
so
Yeah.
he did one, and he talked about there's different lists that are, I think it was a three-part teaching, and some say there's 30 different categories, some say there are 40 different categories. That's all like for after the times of Mashiach, or or is it now where there's more than just the general seven? Because
So,
it just seems like it's not like very
right. So
fulfilling.
some people teach the idea that the seven now are like chapter headings, and in embedded in each, I'm not an expert on this, but this is what I
Mm,
know. Embedded in each of the seven are other things. Okay. Other laws. And what he was teaching is that they're all good practices. They're all
mhm.
good ways for the world to behave even now, but that in the future they will become obligatory. So if a person just sticks to the seven, a non-Jewish person just sticks to the seven, they are right with God. But if they do more than that, that is also to their merit. Um, And at some point in the future, those additional things will become not just nice to do, but obligatory on the nations.
Right. Right. Yeah. It was a good teaching series, but I was kind of like, I don't know, like which ones, because I know that there were a couple different lists, that he had. And I didn't, I don't remember him saying that they were obligatory after, so that makes more sense. I'm glad that they
Yes,
aren't. Yeah.
aren't
So
obligatory now.
correct.
Right.
Versus
So, right, versus what Mashiach's
mhm,
going to explain it all. And for the nations of the world, we'll have a much clearer idea. For now, if you are, if you're not murdering people, if you're not worshiping idols, if you're not having illicit sexual, all those seven things that we talked about, then you're doing what the minimum of what God expects of you. More is available, and there are more things that you can do, but you're not obligated to do them at this stage of history.
thank you.
Sure. If any here, but anybody's interested, I can send you the link to that series that Teresa just mentioned. That it's lengthy. The truth is, I only watched one part. I watched the part that I watched is where he talks about what the responsibility of the Jewish people is to the nations to teach Torah, and it was very exciting to me because we're doing it, So he validated everything that I know about that, and he quoted the person that is my mentor in this, and the book, the hang on a second. The book that I wrote, oh, Lighting Up the Nations, which includes a number of the things that yeah, there you go. A number of things that he said. So it was when I first started doing this, I got a lot of pushback from the Jewish community. Like, why are you? Because a lot of Jews don't understand what we're doing here. Um, but he was like, no, this is where we are now. This is where we are in history. So you guys, along with me, we are like forerunners of what will become like basically commonplace in the future. So it was very exciting for me to hear it. And I'm happy to share the link with anybody that wants to see it after. Anything else? We have another minute. Anybody else comment, question? Okay, you can tell me later in the group if you don't want to speak now about how this worked for you to have the summary and some focus on what the Torah is speaking to the nations and who the players are. And also at the end, I added a little bit about Naama because she's both not from the Israelite people and also um, one of the women in the Parsha. I want to tell you that there was when I first started learning, there was a rabbi who taught, the class was called Torah One Line at a Time. And they did Bereshit, Parshat Bereshit, for like 3 years because they only did one verse at a time and went deep, 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 deep into it. We're obviously not going to do that. I'm trying to do a Parsha a week with you. But okay, good. Thank you, Kathy. But the truth is that we could really spend a couple of years on every Parsha. So, but we're not going to do that. But okay. Thank you, my friends. Thank you for joining. And I'll send you the links to the series that Teresa mentioned. And I welcome your feedback on the group. Thank you so much. Bye, guys.